Today, 2 years later, the Irish government, the Irish people, have been bailed out with 85 billion euros from the EU and the IMF.
Ireland will receive a massive bailout of over $100 billion from the European Union and international monetary.
Let's cut to the chase, right? Ireland has not been bailed out. I have not been bailed out. My children are not being bailed out. The people who are being bailed out by this deal are the very delinquent bankers that lent and gambled on the reputations of Sean Fitzpatrick, of Anglo-Irish Bank, of AIB, of Bank of Ireland. They have nothing to do with me. In actual fact, I've never been inside the foyer of Anglo-Irish Bank, and yet I'm expected to pay taxes for the next possibly 20 years to pay off loans that bank gave out to developers to build their crazy dreams around this city, loans that were originally financed by European banks. I mean, this is just a joke.
Anglo-Irish. Here's the carcass of what would have been its Dublin headquarters.
Socialist Joe Higgins is a member of the European Parliament. He says this is a dark day in Irish history.
The IMF and the European Central Bank are acting as agents for international speculators in the financial markets in demanding that the Irish working class pay for the tens of billions that these speculators gambled in property deals in Ireland.
Well, Ireland suffered. I said this back in 2003, this is a long time ago, that Ireland was experiencing a coup d'etat, which an unholy alliance of the government, which was getting 28% of the cost of every new house in taxation, plus the developers, who were making a fortune buying up land, and the banks. This triumvirate had orchestrated a coup d'etat, a financial coup d'etat in the country.
35,000 mortgage holders in Ireland are in negative equity.
What we have happening is, because of the loss of jobs, because of the heightening of taxes, all of these pressures, the cuts in the public sector wages, there's at least another 150,000 people likely to fall into negative equity to the extent that they can't actually pay for them. I mean, there are pretty much every house that's been bought since about 2005 is now in negative equity, depending on how much people have paid since. But people's ability to pay is the problem. And as I say, we've 35,000 already over their neck in trouble, and another 100,000 likely to end up there within the next year or two.
Right, and leaving the city, you've got, in the exurbs, you have what are now ghost towns.
The ghost estates.
The ghost estate. Talk to me about the ghost estates.
This is Namaland. This is where the Celtic tiger dies.
Namaland or Vietnamaland?
Well, this is it. You know, it's another war full of casualties. This is one of the many ghost estates here in Ireland. They're scattered all over the country, predominantly in the exurbs and the counties, commuter counties surrounding Dublin. Over 300,000 excess homes were built during the Celtic Tiger era that can never be occupied.
300,000.
300,000,
right,
for a population of 4.5 million.
And the prognosis is abandonment, possibly tear down.
Well, exactly, but the problem is that they have been given a notional value and rolled into NAMA, and the banks are now going to be paid for them.
Right.
Thereby bailing out the property developers and bailing out the banks, again at the expense of the Irish taxpayer.
So this bank bailout just rolls on and on and on.
This is it. NAMA was the first bailout of the property developers. Now we've got the bailout of the banks and their bondholders. What could come next is the bailout of the IFSC insurance companies. We're on the hook for that. One of those goes, that's another 65 billion. So currently we're talking about a per capita debt of €170,000 per person.
Does Al-Qaeda, if it's real, this anti-Israel, anti-Semitic, hate-filled group, which was admittedly set up by the CIA, that's on record, magically the head, they're now saying he may be in the top 5, maybe number 1. He's in the top 5. 4 of the top 5 from America. And we're all Lockheed hanging out the Pentagon. Don't forget all that. The head of Al-Qaeda is a fat Jewish kid from California whose videos get uploaded in a Pentagon front group website in the same video logo. The Al-Qaeda logo is in the same as the Intel Center logo. Now, if you believe that, ladies and gentlemen, I mean, ladies and gentlemen, I could grow a big beard and put a turban on and upload videos and say, you Americans, I'm going to get you. You know, you got guns over there, so we're going to get them and kill you. Right as the gun. Look, Obama got caught. We told you this 6 years ago. We told you this a year and a half ago, that the Justice Department was going to use American guns in Mexico to get our guns. Now you hear them. Press conferences. We've got to ban semi-auto and ban multiple sale and shut down gun shows because the stuff in Mexico is happening because of American guns. Turns out that isn't true. Most of them are sold by the military. They're fully auto, grenade launchers, hand grenades. But it turns out over 10,000 guns, ATF agents nationwide are ordered to let them be shipped into Mexico and to help so they can trace them back. That's a false flag right there. But I want to go over this because I've gotten emails, phone calls, and chatter in the last month all basically saying the same thing. Now, this doesn't mean it's 100% because the troops are told they're going to be deploying and sometimes they're not. But then I add this together with a plethora of other data points and it has a lot of credibility. Now we're told, oh, they're going to be there through next year. And they're getting the helicopters. The British helicopters have been attacking for a few weeks. And more U.S. and British advisors and mercenaries and commandos on the front lines going in against Gaddafi. Remember, this is going to last days, not weeks, and it's not a war, it's a kinetic action. Because the government doesn't lie. And Weiner didn't send those photos, but he did. And Obama's hiring people to give him campaign contributions. It's illegal, but so what? I mean, again, it's just total criminality out in the open. But I get these type of, I'm not going to read the entire letter here on air because it's got some information I probably shouldn't get to, but military personnel are saying that this information needs to be passed on to you. This is from Soldier Station at Fort Hood, Texas. The information is that special forces are going into Libya in July. They're already there, ladies and gentlemen, just more from Hood. 1st Cavalry Division, Heavy Armor, and 3rd Corps are deploying to Libya in late October and early November. That means ground war involvement in the plan. Well, yeah, that's always been the plan. Please do whatever you can to get this information out. I'm sure Americans don't want another war.
Without objection.
Why are we in debt? We borrow trillions for wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, trillions for tax cuts for the rich. We borrow billions from China and Japan. We have plenty of money for war, Wall Street, and welfare for the wealthy. But when millions of honest Americans need jobs, need wage increases, need health care, need education, need retirement security, they're told, no, we don't have the money. How is it that the Fed can create trillions of dollars to give to the banks, but the U.S. can't meet its needs without going into debt to banks? The financial system works for a few at the expense of the many. The founders did not intend for America to be run by big banks and Wall Street. The Constitution put the ability to create money in the hands of Congress. The Fed took away that power in 1913. We need to get that power back, to invest in our economy, to create jobs, to put America back to work, to rebuild America without going into debt. We must reclaim our destiny by reclaiming control over the money system.
It comes from Thomas Jefferson, and even before that, it comes from the state ratifying convention of Richmond, Virginia in 1788. I talk about this in the book Nullification. In 1798, Jefferson and Madison draft the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions, respectively. In these resolutions, we see it spelled out what the powers of the states are in situations like this, when the state is responding to a federal law that violates the Constitution, or a federal measure that violates the Constitution. What should the states do? Well, the states should refuse to enforce this. And I give evidence that there is good constitutional grounds for believing this, and I won't go through all this tonight because I'm doing the quick version. But the bottom line of this is that Jefferson said that nullification is the rightful remedy. And James Madison said that the parties to the Constitution, he said this in his famous report of 1800, in the last resort, have got to have some way to check the federal government when all three branches betray us, even the holy judicial branch, which is supposed to be infallible, and once the judges have spoken, we're all supposed to bow down and shut our mouths. Even then, says Madison, we need to be able to resist. Madison said in the Virginia resolutions of 1798 that the states were duty-bound to resist when the federal government violates. Number one, now, in the American system, no government is conceived of as being sovereign. And by sovereign, I mean having ultimate decision-making power. We sometimes talk about state sovereignty, but that's just shorthand for the sovereignty of the peoples of the states. No government is sovereign. That's the old world European model that Americans fled from. It's the peoples of the states who are sovereign, and in their sovereign capacity, they apportion powers between the state governments and the federal government. And in so doing, they don't give up their sovereignty. They are merely exercising their sovereignty. They retain ultimate decision-making power. So if the agent that they themselves created, namely the federal government, should go beyond the powers granted to it by the sovereign peoples of the states, then the very logic of the system demands that the sovereign peoples of the states, by virtue of being sovereign, have to have a last resort mechanism for intervening when their own system perverts its instrument, namely the Constitution. That's the...
Mr. Jim, I can see the shape you're in.
The family is something that's very important. It's ingrained in our Christian heritage. There's, in the Constitution, one of the provisions that I cite the most frequently is Article 1, Section 8, because that tells you everything we're allowed to do. The rest of the things we're not allowed to do, and the 9th and 10th Amendment, of course, confirms that belief. But there's a biblical passage in the Old Testament. It's 1 Samuel chapter 8. So I remember that, the first chapter of Samuel, 1 Samuel in chapter 8. Now that is the provision. I'm sure that you have heard of it before, because this is when, after the Israelites came out of Egypt, they had accepted God as their king. And that's what they lived by. They did not have a king. What they had were judges. It was a patriarchal society. It was a family-driven society. But there were always going to be arguments and conflicts. So these conflicts were taken not to the government, but to somebody that was chosen to be a judge and a respected person that respected the law and respected their traditions. But a time came, there was always temptation, even as the Israelites were leaving Egypt, that there was the temptation to drift away from the belief in God. But there was this effort made under Samuel. The people came and said, you know, we want somebody to take care of us. We want a king. And Samuel strongly objected to it. He explained to him, you do not want a king. That will substitute for God. And he said, and he predicts in this, you need to read that chapter because he predicts what happens if you have a king. He said the king will take your young people, your young men to fight war, the young women to be used in the government. They're going to tax you and they're going to overburden you, and you will have to work so much time, like 25, 35, 45% of the time for the king. And I got to thinking, you know, it was astute wisdom and astute advice, but isn't that essentially what we have done today? I don't think we need a king, and we don't need Washington to act as if they're the king in this country. But it was advised by the founders at the time that the Constitution would not work if we did not remain a moral society. And we're at the crossroads right now because we have lived beyond our means. We have become totally dependent. We do all the things that we shouldn't do and don't do the things we should do. What are we doing? You just take, for instance, our foreign policy. When's the last time we declared war? When's the last time we won a war? Outright. It's been a long time ago. We do need, in the Constitution, a strong national defense. We should have a strong national defense, and we're allowed to defend ourselves. But